I wasn't supposed to be there. Not in that room. Not in that uniform. And certainly not in front of the very people who once told me I was a disgrace. Years ago, my sister whispered that I had ruined the family's name. My parents didn't argue. They just changed the locks. No goodbye. No explanation. Just silence. I disappeared. Not because I was guilty, but because I knew they'd never see past the version of me they hated. They thought I failed, that I would crawl back or vanish for good. But they didn't know the truth. Tonight, I returned not to prove them wrong, but because duty brought me back. And in a twist no one saw coming, the highest-ranking officer in the room looked straight at me and said, "Ma'am, just one word. Enough to silence everyone." I was 19 when everything fell apart. My sister, Alina, pulled me aside after church one Sunday and said, "You're embarrassing us." She said it softly, like she was offering advice, not a verdict, but it landed like a sentence. A week later, my father changed the locks without warning. My mother left a trash bag of my clothes on the porch. Not folded, not packed, just dumped. There was no yelling, no dramatic confrontation, just a cold erasure. They claimed it was because I lied, that I brought shame to the family. The real reason, I had reported something serious. Something I saw during my summer training that involved a powerful Manone of my instructors. I was told to keep quiet, to be a good girl, to let it go, for the sake of the institution, but I didn't. I filed a report, and within days, the whispers started. By the time the investigation was underway, I had become the problem. The betrayal wasn't loud. It was slow. It started with distant eyes at dinner, then missing invitations to family events, then silence. When I came home for winter break, they barely looked at me. Alina wouldn't even hug me. My unclean army colonel called me naive over wine and ribs. And when the man I'd reported walked free due to insufficient evidence, my parents looked at me like I had destroyed something sacred. They didn't want a daughter who made noise. They wanted someone agreeable, someone who smiled for photos and didn't ask questions. So I left. Not just the house, I left everything. I changed my number, deleted my accounts, took only what fit in a single duffel bag. I got on a train and never looked back. For a while, I couch surfed. I cleaned motel bathrooms in Alabama. I slept in a church basement in Kentucky. I learned the rhythm of survival. Quiet, alert, invisible. I thought about quitting school, giving up the dream of West Point altogether. But there was a voice quiet at first, then louder that reminded me why I started. I didn't report him to be brave. I did it because it was right. And if doing the right thing meant being hated, so be it. What they didn't know, what no one knew, was that every moment of abandonment carved out a resolve I hadn't realized I possessed. I wasn't done, not by a long shot. And as I stood on my own in a bus station in Georgia, watching rain trickle down the cracked window, I made a decision that would change everything. I would go back. Not to them, to the dream, to the life they said I wasn't strong enough for, to the academy that tried to silence me. I would return, not quietly, but with purpose, not to prove them wrong, but to become something they could never erase. The first day back at West Point felt like stepping into a battlefield of ghosts. Everyone remembered Minot for what I had accomplished, but for what I had exposed. Whispers trailed me down the corridor. Some cadets looked away. Others gave tight, sympathetic nods, like they didn't know whether I was a martyr or a traitor. But I kept my head up. I didn't come back to make friends. I came back to finish what I started. I trained harder than anyone, not because I wanted to prove a point, but because every drop of sweat reminded me I was still here, still standing. Instructors watched me differently now, some with guilt in their eyes, others with suspicion. I didn't care. I ran until my legs gave out. I studied until the lights shut off in the library. I volunteered for the toughest drills. No one gave me special treatment, and I didn't ask for it. What I wanted couldn't be handed to mate, had to be earned. Quietly. Without fanfare. Then, during a leadership rotation, I was paired with a cadet named Quinn. He didn't know my story, at least. He pretended not to. We were tasked with leading a navigation team through the Catskills under limited rations and harsh weather. 3 cadets fell behind on day 1. Quinn looked to me for instruction, and I took charge, managing our pace, our food, and our morale. By the end of the week, our unit was the only one that completed the course without losing a member. That night, around the campfire, Quinn looked at me and said, "I don't know what they said about you, but they were wrong." I didn't respond. I just nodded. It was the first time in a long while someone saw me, not as a headline or a problem, but as a leader. Over the next 2 years, things changed. I rose through the ranks, became a unit leader, graduated with honors, took my commission. I didn't attend family events, didn't return their calls. My sister got married, I wasn't invited. My parents moved states I wasn't told. They lived their lives pretending I never existed, and I learned to live mine knowing they did. But even as I built my career, there was always a piece of me that ached. Not for reconciliation, but for recognition. For someone in that family to say, "We were wrong about you." I didn't expect it. I just wanted it to not hurt anymore. Then one day, 3 years into my service, I received a formal invitation signed by the Army and sent through the chain of command. My sister's reserve unit was being honored, and I was asked to attend as a special guest and representative of Joint Command. I almost declined, but something in me said, "Go. Not for them, but for you. For the version of you who stood at that bus station in Georgia, soaked in rain and rage and resolve. She deserved to be seen." So, I went. In full dress uniform, medals, bars, polished boots. I walked into the hall like I belonged because I did. No one recognized me at first. Not even my sister. She glanced my way with a polite, detached smile, the kind reserved for strangers. Until her commanding officer walked toward me, extended his hand, and said, "Ma'am, it's an honor to finally meet you." And just like that, the room went quiet. There was a moment of stillness, like the air itself had forgotten to move. My sister stood frozen across the room, champagne glass hovering mid-air, her eyes locked on the man who had just addressed me as "Ma'am." Not "Miss," not "Captain," but "Ma'am," in the tone reserved for those far above him in rank. Her commander gestured toward me with visible respect and said loudly enough for the nearby crowd to hear, "This is General Emma Langston, from Joint Strategic Operations. She's the reason we were able to fund this regional unit expansion. We owe her more than just a handshake." My sister's mouth parted in slow disbelief. One of her friends leaned toward her and whispered something, and I saw her expression crack. The polite, composed face she wore for her colleagues shattered into something raw and confused. She hadn't even known my rank. She hadn't even known I was in the same room, breathing the same air, carrying more stars on my shoulder than anyone here. And now she stood exposed not by me, but by the very man she likely spent months trying to impress. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just nodded respectfully, exchanged a few formal words with the commander, and made my way through the crowd as people turned to look at me with a mix of awe and curiosity. They had no idea that I was once the family disgrace. They only saw the decorated uniform, the quiet authority, the respect I commanded simply by walking into a room. When I reached the seating area, I noticed there was no place card for me at the family table. Of course, still an outsider. I stood beside it in silence until the logistics officer spotted me and, flustered, guided me toward the head table instead. I could feel my sister watching every step. She hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. Her world had shifted beneath her feet, and she didn't know where to place her next step. The speeches began shortly after. Officers thanked donors, recognized promotions, and celebrated the hard work of reservists. When my name was formally introduced, there was a pausier beat of confusion, then applause, then silence again as I stood to speak. I kept it brief. I talked about perseverance, about leadership, earned through hardship. I didn't name names. I didn't share my story. But I looked straight at my sister as I said, sometimes, the ones they discard are the ones who rise highest not to seek revenge, but to serve better than those who doubted them ever imagined. Her face went pale. That was all I needed. After the event, she approached me, slowly, awkwardly, like a child who doesn't know if they're about to be scolded or forgiven. She said my first name as if trying it out for the first time in years. Emma. I raised my brows, saying nothing. I didn't know, she whispered. You never answered. I wanted to laugh. She hadn't called when I needed help. She hadn't written when I graduated. She hadn't looked for me when I vanished from the family tree. But now, here I was, standing in the light, and suddenly, my silence was the crime. I didn't lash out. I just said, you didn't want to know. And I walked away. I left the reception hall not in anger but in a calm so deep it almost frightened me. The kind of calm that only comes when you've already mourned what you lost. I stepped out into the night air, cool and still, and let the sound of the city melt into the background. Somewhere behind me, music swelled again. Glasses clinked. Laughter resumed. The world moved on, and so did I. That night, I stayed at a hotel across town, one of the quiet ones with no valet chatter or endless mirrors, just walls thick enough to let you breathe. I sat on the bed in full uniform, staring at my medals. Not out of pride, but disbelief. How far I had come without anyone there to witness it, without a mother to cry when I got my commission, without a father to shake my hand, without a sister to say, I always knew you could. That kind of loneliness doesn't scream. It just sits quietly beside you like a shadow, never leaving. The next morning, I received an email I didn't expect from my sister's commander. A short note. Thank you for your presence. You left a lasting impression. Attached was a photo. It was taken from behind, capturing the moment I walked across the stage, light catching the silver of my stars. I stared at that image for a long time, because for once, I saw myself the way others did, unshaken, whole, undeniable. A few days later, my mother called. The first time in 12 years. I recognized the number instantly. I let it ring twice, then answered. Her voice was cautious, brittle. Emma? I said nothing. I saw the news. You were at the ceremony. More silence. Too didn't know you'd gone so far. I exhaled slowly. You never asked. There it was, the wound under the skin. Her silence, all those years, wasn't just abandonment, it was a choice. And now that the world saw me differently, she wanted to pretend it hadn't happened. That we hadn't stood at opposite ends of dignity for over a decade. We made mistakes, she offered. But you were always so headstrong. Your father didn't know how to handle you. I almost laughed. I wasn't a storm. I was a mirror, and they couldn't stand their own reflection. I'm not calling for apologies, she added. But maybe we could talk. Over dinner. Your sister and I. Stop, I said, voice steady. You don't get to ask for a seat now. A long pause. Then, so that's it? No, that's the beginning. And I hung up. Not out of cruelty, but because I finally understood something. My story wasn't about their regret. It was about my return not to them, but to myself. The part of me that fought for a place in the world even when no one saved me a chair. The girl they called a disgrace. The soldier they erased. The general they now had to salute. She had come home, but not to the people who left her behind. to the version of herself that never stopped marching forward. I didn't cry after the call. I didn't feel triumphant either. Just still. Like something ancient inside me had finally stopped screaming. I had spent years carrying questions that never had answers. Why didn't they believe me? Why was I the one punished for doing what was right? But after hanging up, I realized maybe the questions didn't matter anymore. Their silence had shaped me, yes, but it no longer defined me. In the weeks that followed, I returned to base. The rhythm of command settled into my bones again: briefings, reports, early mornings, and late nights. My team noticed something was different, more grounded, like I wasn't running from something anymore. Because I wasn't. I was finally standing still. Then one afternoon, Lieutenant Riverami, second in command, knocked gently and slipped into my office. "You have a visitor, ma'am," she said, her brow creased. "He says he's your uncle." I froze. "Send him in," I replied. Not because I wanted to see him, but because I wasn't afraid anymore. Colonel Raymond stepped into the room, older now, but still carrying himself like the man who once told me I had ruined our family name. He looked around with a faint whistle. "Quite the office." I nodded. "What do you want?" He held up both hands. "I came to apologize." I blinked. He continued. "I read the report. The original one. I saw the documents you filed back then. Never looked at them before. I just believed what your father said. That you'd exaggerated. That it was political. But now, after what happened at Alina's ceremony, after seeing you walk in with those stars, I started thinking." I said nothing. He sighed. "I was wrong. We all were. You didn't fail the family, Emma. The family failed you." It wasn't the words that got me. It was the look in his eyes. The first honest look I had ever received from any of them. Not pity, not dismissal, just acknowledgement. "I'm not asking you to forgive us," he added. "But I thought maybe you should hear it from at least one of us. You were brave. Braver than any of us." I leaned back. "Why now?" He looked at the photo on my shell phone of me and my squad in training. "Because now I realize you didn't just survive. You led. And we were too prouder, too small to see it." He left quietly, and I sat in the stillness afterward, wondering if healing always looked like this. Not dramatic, not tearful, just honest. A crack in the stone wall. That night, I found myself writing an email. Not to him, not to my parents, but to Alina. It was short. "You once said I was an embarrassment. Maybe I was, but not for the reasons you thought. I embarrassed you because I told the truth, and because I didn't break when you left me behind. I'm not writing for reconciliation. I'm writing because I finally forgive you. Not for your sake, for mine." I hit send and felt no weight lift, just a quiet release, like setting down something heavy you didn't realize you were still holding. 2 weeks later, I received an official request to attend the annual West Point Founders Gala. I almost deleted the email out of instinct. That place had once represented so much painful smiles, buried reports, and cold indifference. But now, I had outlived it, outranked it. And maybe it was time I walked into that building not as a memory of scandal, but as a symbol of what truth survives. I arrived in a full dress uniform, 4 stars, polished boots, my nameplate gleaming under the chandeliers. People turned as I entered the grand hall. At first, I thought it was polite curiosity. Then I saw the whispering begin. Some tried not to stare. Others looked straight at me, eyes wide not with shock, but recognition. One of the board members, General Matthews, approached me with his hand outstretched. "General Reid," he said with a respectful nod. "We're honored." I nodded back. "Thank you. We've reviewed the old misconduct case," he added quietly. "You were right. And we were late." That word late hung heavier than any apology. It wasn't a cover-up this time. It wasn't sanitized. It was an admission. He continued. We're revising the internal reporting protocols. Your file is being used as a training case for ethics and reform. It won't erase what happened, but it might help prevent the next. I should have felt satisfied. Instead, I just felt tired. Like someone who's been running for so long they don't remember what rest feels like. The evening passed in a blur of speeches, handshakes, and sideways glances. But the moment that stood still in time came just before dessert. A voice behind me said, Emma? I turned. Alina. She stood in a dark emerald gown, clutching her clutch like a lifeline. I didn't know you'd be here, she said quietly. I was invited, I replied, calm but clear. She hesitated, then stepped closer. I saw the clip online. From the ceremony. You were commanding. I tilted my head. That's the job. I didn't recognize you at first, she admitted, eyes watering. But then I did, and I've never been more ashamed of how I treated someone. There was a long pause. The music in the hall faded beneath the pressure of the moment. You don't need to apologize, I said. I want to. You want to stop feeling guilty, I corrected. She blinked. Isn't that the same thing? No, I replied. But I accept your words, and I hope you find peace with them. She looked down. I don't expect us to be close again. We won't, I answered gently. But that doesn't mean I wish you harm. She nodded. And just like that, no hug, no embrace, no tearful reunion, she stepped back into the crowd. It wasn't closed. It was an acknowledgement. And that was enough. As the evening drew to a close, I walked out into the crisp night air, the weight of old shadows finally loosening their grip. I didn't need a perfect ending. I didn't need them to love me again. I only needed to stand, fully and freely, in the truth I had never abandoned. It was Alina who extended the invitation, a quiet message sent a week after the gala. Dad's retirement dinner is next Saturday. I don't expect you to come, but if you do, I'll make sure there's a seat. For a long time, I stared at the message, unsure why it hit me so hard. I hadn't spoken to my father in 16 years, the man who once slammed the door in my face without a word of explanation. But something in me didn't want silence anymore, not the kind I used to survive, but the kind that keeps wounds festering. So I went. The dinner was at an upscale hotel ballroom in DC. Nothing extravagant, but formal enough to demand cocktail dresses and stiff smiles. I arrived in uniform, not to provoke, just to be honest. This was who I was now. The host paused as I entered, scanning the guest list. Name? General Emma Reid. His eyes widened slightly. Ah, yes. Right this way, ma'am. The word ma'am carried across the entrance just as Alina looked up. Her mouth parted slightly stunned, but she quickly recovered and walked over. You came, she said softly. I said I would. People began to turn, one by one. Heads swiveled. Forks paused mid-air. The woman they had erased had returned standing, straighter, dressed sharper, eyes clearer than they'd ever remembered. Then I saw him. My father. He was seated at the center of the long family table, flanked by military friends and old colleagues from the agency. His expression flickered when he saw me, surprise, then discomfort, then something unreadable. Alina led me to a seat. A cousin murmured, Is that General Emma Reid? Someone whispered behind their wineglass. An elderly man at the table stood and offered his hand. General Reid, I've read your piece in Military Leadership Quarterly. Brilliant work. My father froze. Another guest added, You were the one leading the East Africa negotiations last fall, weren't you? Stunning poise under pressure. Still no reaction from my father. Not until a tall, weathered man in a navy suit stepped forward. He wore a small pin on his lapel. 4 stars. Colonel Reid, he said, addressing my father directly. Is this your daughter? My father hesitated. Yes, he finally said. Emma. The man smiled and turned to me. General, on behalf of the Joint Command, it's an honor. Your work has shifted our playbook. And then just like that the truth landed. Not through anger, not through confrontation, but through quiet reverence. My father's peers now looked at me not as a scandal, but as a legacy. He rose slowly, eyes meeting mine. You've done well, he said. I gave a small nod. I did what needed to be done. A pause. Then, the unthinkable. I was wrong. The room held its breath. I didn't say anything in return. I didn't need to, because for the first time in my life, the silence belonged to them, not me. After the dinner, I stepped out onto the hotel terrace. The night was quiet, the city lights shimmering across the Potomac like scattered fire. I leaned against the railing, letting the silence breathe through me. It wasn't a triumph I felt. It wasn't even vindication. It was something deeper, like laying down a weight I hadn't realized I was still carrying. I heard footsteps behind me. Alina. She stood a few feet away, unsure whether she was welcome. I didn't move. Eventually, she stepped closer. You really made it, she whispered. I looked at her. You knew I would. She gave a soft nod. I wasn't sure until tonight. There was a long pause between us, the kind only years of silence can build. I'm sorry, she said finally, for not standing up for you, for not believing you. I was scared. I know, I said quietly. We all were. Another pause. But I never stopped following you, she added. Your name kept showing up. On reports. In policy briefs. Even in that West Point training video they showed last month. Leadership under fire. I didn't know how to reach out after all this time. I didn't have an answer for her. Just a stillness. I thought maybe you'd hate us, she said, her voice almost trembling. I did, I admitted. For a long time. But hate's just another form of holding on. I let it go the day I realized I didn't need you to believe in me anymore. I already had. Alina looked down, wiping her eyes. You were always braver than I was. I smiled faintly. No. I was just too stubborn to quit. The door behind us opened. My father stepped out, his face unreadable in the dim light. He looked older than I remembered. Smaller. He approached slowly, then stopped a few feet away. I know I can't undo it, he said. I don't expect you to, I replied. I thought silence would protect the family, he murmured. But it just emptied it. I looked at him, really looked at him. Not as the father who abandoned me. Not as the man who'd once said nothing while I was erased. But as a man who finally stood in the wreckage of what he built and dared to speak. We all made choices, I said softly. He gave a slow nod. If you ever want to come home. I already have, I said. He blinked, confused. This uniform? I gestured. This life? I built it. With or without your blessing. I made a home inside myself. And for once, I'm not looking for permission. He gave a slow, respectful nod. Not approval. Not absolution. Just recognition. That was enough. That night, I didn't stay long. I left before dessert. I didn't owe anyone the full show, just my presence. As I walked through the lobby, the young attendant behind the desk straightened and said, "Good evening, General." I smiled. There was no applause, no cinematic swell of music, just quiet footsteps on polished marble, and peace that followed me all the way to the car.